Good morning, everyone. As you're trickling in, great to see you all. We'll give folks a minute as everyone continues to join from the waiting room. But thanks for spending part of your Thursday with us. We'll give it another minute or so as people continue to join. All right. Well, I know people are continuing to trickle in and from their calendar invite, but thank you all so much for being here with us. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Kyler Blodgett. I'm a state and local policy analyst with People for Bikes. And we're really glad that you're here with us for our June segment in our monthly industry webinar series. This month's conversation will be about our 2022 People for Bikes City Ratings program, which just launched to the public earlier this week. So it's a well-timed webinar, and we're glad that you're here to get the hot off the press information with us. You'll meet our fantastic panelists in just a minute, but before we do, I wanted to make sure that everyone here knows that June is a special month in which we'll actually be hosting 2 industry webinars. Our second will be next Wednesday, and we'll launch a 3-part series about diversity, equity, and inclusion within the bicycle industry. You can learn more and register in the link that is just in the chat. Now back to this morning, I want to remind everyone that of course you are welcome and encouraged to take notes, but we will send everyone a recording of our time and then a copy of the slides to all who registered today. We'll have about 30 minutes together, the first 20 or so for presentation and the final 10 for Q&A. So please make sure that you use Zoom's Q&A feature in the bottom of your screen to write our questions throughout so that our panelists can be ready to answer when we get to that portion. And now, a quick intro of, if the slides will advance, Rebecca Davies, our panelist for this morning. She's with People for Bikes as our City Ratings Program Director and has been putting in a ton of hours over the course of the year to bring the information to the public about city ratings and to make sure that you all are informed about what we have going on this year. Rebecca, over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Kyler. And yeah, thanks again to everyone on the call today joining. This is our agenda. We are going to first have a quick overview of what the goal of the city ratings is and how it works. And then we'll talk about some of the top performers this year in the city ratings results. And then we're going to get into how cities succeed, how they move up the rankings, whether they're starting from the bottom or they're already high scorers. Then we'll spend a little bit of time talking about a few things that are on deck for city ratings and then get into a bit of Q&A. So I like to start off thinking kind of big picture about what we're trying to achieve, right, with city ratings and more broadly with bicycling in cities. And part of that is thinking about, well, what is the experience of riding in a great city for bikes? And I'm sure many of you on this call have lots of thoughts about what that is or could be. Maybe you've experienced that in cities here or abroad. But we think of it this way: riding in a great city for bikes is safe, it's fun, it's accessible to everyone, it's easier than driving. It's not just one option, it's one of your easiest options. It's always improving, it strengthens communities and individuals, and it has a smooth transition between walking and transit and driving. You know, it's multimodal, you have options, and bicycling is one of them that's convenient and accessible. So that's the big picture goal. And the role that city ratings is playing in trying to get us to that goal is really focusing on infrastructure and on bike networks, so connected infrastructure on the ground. There are, of course, tons of ways to make bicycling great in our cities, and I'm sure many of you work on that in various capacities, and we People for Bikes work on it in many different ways. But this particular rating system is really focused on infrastructure because we know we can't get to those great cities for bikes without having great bicycling infrastructure. It's not the only thing that'll get us there, but it is a critical part. So this ratings focuses on infrastructure, and it does that by measuring progress, so we know how far we've come and how far we have to go. sharing resources and best practices to see what's working in one city and how that can perhaps be adopted in another, and engaging more people in advocacy. We always want more people working on making great cities for bikes. And the way that it works in terms of the actual methodology behind it is 80% of the score is from the bicycle network analysis that produces the network score in the city ratings, and 20% of the score is from the community survey that produces the community score. So the network analysis is a very quantitative measure based on data from OpenStreetMap about what infrastructure exists on the ground in cities across the country. And the community survey is what it sounds like. It's a survey of community members in the city and how they perceive bicycling to be in the city. So it gives us a bit of perspective data to complement the information we have in the network analysis. And sometimes these measures line up well, and sometimes they don't. And when they don't, that's an opportunity to ask questions about both sources of data. So next slide. So now we're going to talk about who the top performers are this year. You can see this on the website as well. So I won't go into too much detail, but just kind of highlight a few interesting aspects of the top performers. So these are small cities specifically. Small cities tend to score higher for a variety of reasons. So it's useful to compare cities of like sizes to each other. So we see Provincetown once again is #1. Congratulations to them. And they're also #1 among all cities. But we have a few new additions to the ratings on this list in 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. Those are all cities we added for the first time this year. You'll notice on this chart that on the community survey column, a few cities have zeros. That doesn't mean that people hate bicycling in those cities. What it means is that we didn't get enough survey responses to be able to have include a community survey score here. So the score is 0. But because some of these cities have really great bike networks, regardless, they still were able to score high on this list, even without that even with a community survey score of 0. So next year, if they have enough community surveys submitted, then their score could be even higher. Another highlight here, Ashland, Wisconsin jumped from 28th up to 5th. We saw that the data was updated in OpenStreetMap and showed up in our network analysis that there's a couple great paths running right through the middle of Ashland. So that just facilitates travel throughout the city, and in connection with quiet side streets really makes for a great bike network there. San Luis Obispo is a familiar name, Key West as well, and then a couple other newcomers in the top 10. Next slide, please. Among medium cities, there are the same top 3, slightly different order: Davis, Berkeley, and Boulder. Ankeny is a new addition to the list, a new addition to the ratings this year. And that's because in the map, it shows they have multi-use paths along a lot of their large roads. But pretty interesting about Ankeny is their community survey score is a bit lower than the others, than some of the others on this list. And so, I'm interested to talk to folks who live there or work there and hear more about what it's like riding there, or what the network's like, and to get more perspective. Corvallis moved up the list quite a lot as well, from 26th to 5th. And that's because they updated their OpenStreetMap data to show that actually there's a more robust network there than the data originally was showing last year. So that is exciting to see. Yeah, and then a few other familiar names also in the top 10. Next slide, please. And finally, large cities. So one thing I'll note is that we do break New York into its boroughs. We've done that historically throughout the city rating. So you'll see New York City appears actually 3 times on this list in 1st, 4th, and 6th, which is pretty impressive. But also but 1, 2, 3 is the same here: Brooklyn, San Francisco, Seattle. Even though the top 10 are very similar for large cities year to year, a lot of these cities did gain a point or 2 in their overall score. So we are seeing improvement. Seattle in particular, their network score jumped 5 points. That's really exciting to see. We know Seattle's putting in protected bike lanes, it's making safer intersections, doing the things they need to do, and that's showing up in their network score. I'll also note that large city scores don't tend to move as quickly as some of the small and medium-sized cities, because they are large, right? 1 protected bike lane, 1 mile protected bike lane, for instance, isn't going to move a large city score a lot, whereas it'll take more consistent development of the network throughout the city. Of course, large cities also have more resources to build out their network, so it's a trade-off between these different city sizes. But otherwise, this list is fairly similar, with Washington, D.C. creeping into the top 10. Next slide. Thanks. So I mentioned earlier on that we're thinking not only about these cities that are in the top 10, but also about cities that are doing the right things to build out their network. They're some of the fastest moving cities in terms of improving their score and improving their bike networks are cities that are starting from a tough place. They started with not a great score, but they're doing the right things to move it forward. So we, as part of our city reads, we like to highlight that work too. And if you see on our website, our 10 featured cities, and also we have 6 case study cities in under the Create Great Places header. You can see we talk about cities that aren't in the top 10, but that are doing the right things to get there. All cities, whether they are high scoring or low scoring, benefit from these 6 actions or these 6 steps to improve their score. And we put them together in an acronym called SPRINT to make it easy to remember. And these are fundamentally the things that improve the network score in that network analysis. And so that's why we're emphasizing them here. And I'm going to go through and talk about each one and give an example of what that looks like. So next slide, please. So first S is safe speeds. An example of this here is Miami, where they reduced speed limits on neighborhood streets to 25 miles per hour, and that improved their network score by 16 points. That is a really big improvement. Of course, Miami's starting from a tough spot, a score of 4. However, 20 is a lot better than 4, and slower streets are a lot better for people on bikes. And they're better for people driving too, and people walking. We know that speed is, there's plenty of research. We know that speed is a major contributor to injuries and fatalities. And so slowing down cars is very, very important to improving our streets. So the BNA rewards that in terms of showing these streets as lower stress. I will add that it's, of course, we also support the changes to the streets that ensure people travel the posted speed limit, things like speed bumps and other kinds of calming elements that will help ensure cars are driving slower, although the BNA does not account for those. It accounts for the posted speed limit. That's what's measured. Next slide, please. So P is protected bike lanes. We love to talk about protected bike lanes. And you can see here, this is a map from Central. This is Inner Seattle. This is from 2021. It had a BNA score of 53. So that's the network score. The blue areas are parts of Central Seattle that are better for bicycling, and the red areas are parts that are worse, that have less connectivity to the bike network. And those green lines that you see, those are the protected bike lanes. Green and kind of teal, and then purple are painted bike lanes. So this is 2020-21. And then next, Kyla, thanks. You can see 2022, we have more protected bike lanes. The BNA score has gone up 5 points. More of this map is blue, and more of it is part of this connecting network. That's a really great improvement for a large city. And I love being able to visually see what those protected bike lanes are doing for the city and contributing to that score. And also note here that we talk about protected bike lanes a lot. Painted bike lanes, of course, are important too, and they do benefit streets in the network analysis. However, the places where they're beneficial are more limited. They are going to be painted bike lanes are going to be considered adequate infrastructure in the bicycle network analysis on streets that are relatively lower speed and have only a couple lanes of motor vehicle travel. Streets that are, say, have 4 lanes of car travel at 40 miles per hour, a painted bike lane is simply not sufficient. People are not going to bike with their children on that road, and or even just on their own on that road. The average person is not going to want to bike on that kind of street without some kind of secure separation from cars. So the network analysis does not reward painted bike lanes unless on those high speed, wide streets. Those are streets that need protected bike lanes, so that's why we emphasize those here. Next slide, please. The R is for road diets. Road diets, another term for this would be a lane reduction or right sizing. And this is reducing the number of motor vehicle travel lanes on a street. This is perhaps the most politically difficult of the items on this list, but so beneficial. And throughout the U.S. we have quite wide streets with a lot of excess space that could be repurposed for bikes or for many other great uses, for public space, for outdoor dining, for wider sidewalks, all sorts of things. And here, I love this picture. It's just so illustrative from a project for public spaces in Lancaster, California, where they took this main street and reduced it from 5 car lanes and 2 parking lanes to 2 lanes for cars and 2 lanes of car parking. And then down the middle, they actually added additional car parking. I would probably prefer protected bike lanes myself, but this is still a great transition. And and they added street trees here, and this is really slowing down traffic on this street. And this street, even without dedicated separated bike space, this street is better for bikes, and that's because there aren't as many cars. They're going to be traveling slower because they don't have as much space, and there's not going to be as many conflicts between cars in 5 lanes of traffic at intersections with bikes and with pedestrians. So this really benefits safety for everyone. This is a safer street for people biking, walking, driving, rolling of any kind. And you get these incredible amenities when you repurpose this space too. So road diets benefit the network analysis as well. Next slide, please. Intersection treatments. You can also think of this as safe crossings, same thing. So the BNA does measure intersections. It doesn't show up in our maps, it's not visualized, but it is considering if someone can get from A to B, do they have to cross a street? And if they do, is there a safe intersection for that street? And here are a couple examples of what that could look like. That could be a pedestrian island, like we have in Long Beach on the photo on the left, or it could be signalized, like in the photo on the right, or it could be stop signs, something that makes it safe for people to cross the street while they're on a bike. So this is really important because we know that an oversized portion of crashes and injuries and fatalities occur at intersections. So we need to build safe crossings, or where there should be a crossing and there isn't one. So people end up, racing across the street on their bike trying to get to the other side. So we really need these kinds of safe crossings to ensure a strong bike network. Next slide. Then there's network connections. This is kind of a big one and such an important one. So I love this example. This is Jersey City and Hoboken are building a protected bike lane that connects their respective networks. So this is building the network beyond their own. It's into the neighboring city. So this is one way to think of network connections is, okay, if you have existing infrastructure, but it doesn't enable someone to do a complete trip, say from their house to the grocery store on a safe route, then you need to fill in those gaps. And by filling in those gaps, it'll have exponential benefit because now those continuous routes are possible instead of what many of us have experienced bicycling in cities in the US, where you have a section that's nice and a section that doesn't feel nice, and it kind of alternates back and forth. And the average person is not going to tolerate that kind of insecurity along their ride. And there's a second way to think of network connections. Next slide, please. Which is how we build our cities so that people can live closer to where they need to go. If you shorten the distance, people are more likely to be able to bike and going to have more ways to get to their destination. So that means building more compact cities. And if there are planners, urban planners on the call, some of these items are going to be very familiar to you. I'll try not to get too much far into wonky details here for those who aren't familiar with some of these ideas. But essentially, there are a variety of ways cities can build more compact and be more compact and produce less sprawl over the course of growth. They can eliminate parking requirements. A lot of cities require, when you build a new building, you have to build X number of parking spots, and that can be a really inefficient use of space when you don't need all those spots. Like in the bottom right here, you can see this Macy's, which is far more parking than anybody would need. And this is not good for bikes because it increases distances between where you are and where you need to go. Also incentivizing development around transit and trails. You can build homes along a bike path and incentivize development in those areas where these other modes of transportation besides driving are more feasible, make it possible for people to live in those areas where it's feasible. And then finally, concentrating new housing close to services. How can we add more housing in areas that already are rich with amenities so that people can live close to those things and they're more likely to bike and have more options, have more ways to get to those destinations with that kind of development. All right, next slide, please. And the last one here, the T, is trusted data. Corvallis is a great example. I showed them that they were one of the top 10 medium-sized cities. You can see here their score increased 21 points over the course of the year, and that was mainly due to improving the OpenStreetMap data that goes into our city ratings. OpenStreetMap data quality can vary a lot across different places, so ensuring that it's up to date for the city that you're interested in can really help ensure the city ratings measurement is useful. The other piece of trusted data is the community surveys. As I talked about, some cities didn't meet the threshold for the number of community surveys they need for them to receive a score in that category, and they'd receive a 0. So ensuring there are enough community surveys for your city submitted will also benefit the city rating score. And I've noted here that OpenStreetMap edits and community survey responses for next year are due January 31st. All right, one more slide I think we have. Yeah, okay. So those are all the ways that cities can improve their city rating score, whether they are, again, at the top or at the bottom. It's a lot of, of course, their circumstances are going to be a little different, whether you're building your first protected bike lane or your 50th, but there's still the same kinds of things that need to be done in cities across the country, and that'll be reflected in the city ratings. So as far as what's on deck for city ratings coming up later this year and into next, we will be releasing international results in the fall of this year. We've added a bunch of international cities last year, really to provide just a comparison and benchmark between our ratings for the US and Canada. And so we'll release those in the fall. And we're also going to invest some time and energy into helping cities update their OSM data. We heard feedback that that's something cities really want. So we're going to do that, and get in touch with me if you're interested in that. We're going to run the BNA for the entire country to produce a national data set. We're going to spend some time comparing city ratings data historically, now that we have 5 or 6 years of data for some cities on city ratings. So we'll share those that comparison over time with you later this year. And we're also going to update the BNA software to make sure it's using the latest infrastructure design guidance. We know that changes year to year, and it's due for an update. So shouldn't radically change results, but could make a few improvements here and there. All right, and next slide, please. And now we are to the Q&A. I'm looking forward to any of your questions, and you're also, of course, welcome to contact me afterwards as well.
And Rebecca, so we have about 7 minutes left. For folks who are on, this is a great and pretty unique chance to ask Rebecca questions live. So please don't squander it. If you have something on your mind, now's a great chance to put it in the Q&A box. But as folks are thinking, Rebecca, maybe I imagine something people might be wondering is, for maybe 2 slices of folks. One, if you're someone who works at a city, maybe they're in a DOT, maybe they're a planner. And secondarily, maybe if someone works in a bike company, sort of in the industry, what's like one ask you would have for people on this call that they can go do after this presentation?
That's a great question. So I would, if you are with a city, I'd ask that you sign up for our City Snapshot, which is a survey we send out, which is completely optional. It's not required for the city ratings, but it helps us get information from cities that helps us ensure the data is good for your city, and gives us feedback on our city ratings so we can improve it. We use that information to improve the ratings over time. And also it helps us learn what cities are doing. It's a chance to kind of brag about what your city's doing. And we particularly want to hear about the things that fit into those sprint categories, because we love to be able to talk about cities that are doing those great things and provide those tangible examples of how it happened. So that's one ask for folks who are with cities or advocates who might be able to send it along to folks they know at their city. For advocates in industry, definitely you can fill out the community survey. That's really, really helpful for us. If you're feeling a bit more ambitious, and you can work on improving the data in OpenStreetMap. It's a bit of a mapping exercise. There's a bit of a ramp up learning curve, but once you got the hang of it, it can be kind of fun to say, okay, well, I'm going to go ride around, see what's in my city, and make sure it lines up with the map, with the data we have in the map. So those are all really helpful contributions. Besides all of the great work around advocacy locally that I'm sure many of you are involved in. I think we got a question here in about the Q&A. Let's see. Our cities started the process 3 years ago with the city ratings, but have not participated in the last 2 years. Is our data still valid? How do we continue to participate after being out of the game the last couple of years? Yeah, great question. So we used to require more data from cities to be included in the city ratings. We had a more expansive rating system, and we chose to narrow it down to focus really on infrastructure, and also to reduce the sort of burden of contribution for cities to provide data. So really at this point, cities don't have to do anything to participate. We will rate your city each year as long as it has a network analysis score. We will rate it in the city ratings. If your city doesn't have a network analysis score, you can simply send me an email and ask for your city to be included, and I will add it to our ratings, and it'll be included next year then. But yeah, so you don't have to submit anything, but the city snapshot does help us get some information about what the city's doing, and ensure that we have kind of a more accurate ratings kind of picture and accurate information. And also cities can help recruit community survey responses. That's helpful too. Another question is, what is the OpenStreetMap data that cities provide? So OpenStreetMap is pretty interesting. It's essentially like a Wikipedia map of the world. You know, anybody can contribute or edit it. And the advantage to that is that a lot of people can help improve the data and contribute to it. However, of course, it may not reflect the latest development in a city's bike network if nobody's added it to the map. So we don't collect data, we don't collect, for instance, data sets from cities and then update OpenStreetMap for them on a regular basis. We are going to spend some time doing that later this year. So that's why I encourage you to get in touch with me if that's something you're interested in. But in general, we do rely on whether it's city staff or volunteers. A lot of times there's communities of folks who work on OpenStreetMap in cities around the country that can really help improve the data. And not only for the purposes of city ratings, but there are a variety of different tools and applications that use OpenStreetMap data as an input. So I think it has it's beneficial in many ways. But yeah, but we don't on a regular basis translate data from cities into OpenStreetMap. We rely on what has been added to OpenStreetMap for our ratings. I'm going to check on the next questions here. Suggestions on how to improve community scores. That is a great question, because the community scores, in a way, they can reflect the bike network, but they can also reflect other things that shape people's perspective on bicycling. For instance, do they know how to find the safe routes that exist, or do they feel like they can comfortably bike in their city because they know how to maintain a bike, or they have a working bike, or all sorts of things? Or maybe we do see in the community survey sometimes people who are kind of reflecting on their recreational riding experience, which might be very different from their transportation riding experience. So, you know, I think improving the community score from an infrastructure perspective, it's the same things for improving the network. However, it's going to be more of it's going to include more of the wider breadth of things that help people bicycle in a city. The other ways that I talked about that infrastructure doesn't touch necessarily, that's getting new riders riding and helping with wayfinding. And I think to pin down for any one city what that is would probably require additional community outreach, whether that's surveys or focus groups, to be able to identify for a given city, what is it that might not be helping people understand, or helping people feel comfortable riding in the city. So I wouldn't necessarily hazard a guess for any given city what that would be, but I would encourage, if your community survey is lower than you think or than you'd expect, then I would encourage you to kind of do more of that exploration through that community outreach to understand what it is that drives people's sentiments around bicycling in your city. Kyler, do we have time for one more?
Yep, I think we do.
Okay. Let's see, last one here. So crash and ridership numbers are important to determine a community's level of bike friendliness. How do these factor into the city rating score? Absolutely. I mean, crash data and ridership data is hugely important, and we work with it in other ways at People for Bikes. We used to include it in the city ratings as one of the inputs, and we decided to remove it for a few reasons. One is some of the difficulties of getting that data. There isn't great fine-grained data on ridership for cities across the country. There are for certain cities in some places, but consistently across the country, it's kind of tough. And also, similarly, crash data, you can get some crash data is widely available and some is not. And so we were collecting some of that information directly from cities, but we weren't getting it from enough cities. Like, we just weren't getting enough responses, and that was kind of difficult then to make a comparison between a few cities where you have crash or injury data and a lot of cities where you don't. It's hard to say anything meaningful. So that was part of the reason we took it out, but also because we know that safe bike networks, comfortable bike networks, lead to fewer crashes and injuries and leads to higher ridership. Again, not the only thing that contributes to those numbers, but we know that a great bike network is foundational to those other things. So if you're improving your bike network, you should be moving towards higher ridership and fewer crashes over time. Maybe not immediately, but in the long run, that is going to those numbers will change as a result of your bike network changing. Not just for people biking, it should change for people walking and for people driving as well, because research shows that streets that are safer for bikes are safer for people traveling by all modes of transportation.
Great. Well, that's our time together. Rebecca, thank you so much for your insight into the City Ratings program. Everyone, thank you for your time this morning, and hope to see you next Wednesday as well for part 1 of our DEI webinar. All right. Have a great Thursday, everybody.
Thank you.